Did you know that the first president of the United States was actually bulletproof? It was in the French-Indian War. He was surrounded on all sides. Multiple people were firing at him, and he did not get hit. He did not go down. Hi, my name is Gabe Randall, and I wanted to teach you something you probably didn't know. Okay, so the story takes place in about 1755. This is 20 years before the American Revolution. It was a conflict between the United Kingdom and France. Both of them were trying to secure land near the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Obviously, no agreement could be reached, and so it resulted in a war. The Native Americans sided with the French, and the Americans sided with the British. And so that was the start of what we call the French and Indian War. Our story begins. Our bulletproof man, George Washington, he was a colonel at the time in the Virginia militia, and he had obviously, if he was a colonel, he had men under him, and so he was recruited by British General Braddock to capture Fort Duquesne. So as Washington, General Braddock, and their men, they're all marching through the woods towards the fort when suddenly they got ambushed. They were only a few miles away from the fort when the French and the Indians ambushed them. The British were at a serious disadvantage. They were always used to open field firing. It's a really weird concept. Um, it's pretty much where you get in lines and you take turns shooting at each other, and the side with the most people is going to win. That's a great idea. Um, but I mean, that's what they had been doing for thousands of years. So let's see, it was a force of 72 French regulars, 146 Canadian militiamen, 637 Indians. So that's about 855 people on the French Indian side. Uh, and then there was about 1,300 English in the woods. So 850 versus 1,300. Even for an ambush, it seems like you should be able to do pretty well. But considering that the Indians and the French weren't doing the open field firing that the British were used to, they were just at a serious disadvantage. They couldn't do anything about it. So if you have people firing at you behind trees and behind rocks and stuff and in ravines, they've already like figured out their positions and stuff. So you really can't do much about that. The British didn't have it very good. Um, Especially once you consider their was it I think it's blue. No, it's red. They're red, they're like bright red uniforms. Like whose great idea was that? Um, so they had their uniforms, and the British officers, they had it even worse. They're on horses with their red uniforms. Like, great idea. You definitely want the people in charge to be able to be hit easier. I know if I was going to war, I definitely want to put those people in charge in a better spot. They did it. I'm assuming that the Indians would have been very good at concealing themselves, uh, because they did that for a living. They hunted prey. They had to feed themselves. They had to get food, and so if you're like obvious, then you're not going to be able to get your food. Anyway, at some point, General Braddock got mortally wounded. He couldn't fight back, and after 2 or 3 hours of attempting to fight back, George Washington was able to lead the British troops into a retreat, and they had lost a bunch of people. Let's see. Right here it says that 714 British soldiers were killed or wounded of uh, the thing is said 1,300. And for the officers, these are the guys in charge, the ones on the horses, uh, out of 86 British officers, 63 were killed or wounded. Love those numbers. On the flip side, the French only lost about 30 soldiers and 3 officers. So, yeah, those are not good numbers. But once to a safe place, Washington realized how close he had come to death, and upon his arrival to Fort Cumberland, he heard rumors of his own death. but he didn't want his brother John Washington worried, so he wrote him a letter. The letter says, "By the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I have been protected beyond all human probability or expectation, for I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me, yet I no, yet escaped unhurt, although death was leveling my companions on every side of me." Like, man, what are the chances of that? He had 4 bullet holes through his coat, 2 horses shot under him. That means that he was riding a horse. It got shot out. It died, probably. It was wounded. And so he had to get a new horse. And then that one was shot out from under him. And then he got a new horse. So, I mean, that's already hard to believe. But then there's also accounts of him brushing bullet fragments out of his hair after the battle. And there's another account of people medallion that had a G and a W. It was like a golden medallion that had been shot off of him. And if you think about it, that should have hit him. All of those bullets should have hit him, but they didn't. He escaped from the battle. As far as I can tell, he escaped totally untouched. But then it gets better. So 15 years later, Washington and his old friend, Dr. James Craik, they had actually been at the battle together, and Dr. James Craik was the person trying to treat General Braddock. But 15 years later, they were surveying the land near where the battle happened, and they ran into some Indians. And those Indians were actually there at the battle, and one of them being Chief Red Hawk. He said, "I'm a chief and ruler over my tribes. My influence extends to the waters of the Great Lakes and to the far blue mountains." Here he's establishing who he is, why he has authority, why what he's saying matters. So then he says, "I've traveled a long and weary path that I might see the young warrior of the great battle. It was on that faithful day with the white man's blood mixed with the streams of our forest that I first beheld this chief." Another way of saying that a bunch of people died, specifically British white soldiers. But then he also says that it was on this battle that he first beheld this chief. I see that as a sign of respect for George Washington, an acknowledgement towards him. A chief would be somebody in authority, somebody who has power over people, and obviously he recognized that George Washington has authority and has some power. Then he continues on. "I called to my young men and said, 'Mark yon tall and daring warrior. He is not of the redcoat tribe. He hath Indian wisdom, and his warriors fight as we do. Himself is alone exposed.'" If I had to guess, this would be, since he had men from his own militia. They were, I'm sure they were fighting with him. And I'm guessing, if I had to guess, they fought differently than the British, because obviously it says, "And his men fight as we do." So these militiamen would actually have, at the time, they would have been uh, used to fighting Indians, because the Virginia militia would have been formed in order to protect farmers and families from the Indians. So they wouldn't have been standing in lines shooting at each other. They would be doing what works so that they can best protect themselves. Therefore, I would say that they were better prepared than the British troops. I would also say that of the 500 British troops that did survive, I would say that it wouldn't surprise me if most of them were from the militia, because they knew what to do on that terrain. They knew how to fight back. I also wanted to point out how it says, I called to my young men and said, 'Mark yon tall and daring warrior.'" George Washington, he's about 6'2", 6'3", and he's on a horse. That makes him a very easy target. Keep that in mind, because then he continues, "Let your aim be certain that he dies. Our rifles were leveled, rifles which, but for him, knew not how to miss." That means that they hit what they aim at, except for this one time they could not hit him. And again, we saw that he had bullet holes through his coat. He had his horses shot under him, and they just couldn't hit him. And so he says, "'Twas all in vain. A power mightier far than we shielded him from harm. He cannot but die in battle." Um, and he says, I am old and soon shall be gathered to the great council of fire among my fathers in the land of shades. But before I go, there is something that bids me speak the voice of prophecy. Listen. The Great Spirit protects that man and guides his destinies. He will become a chief of nations, and a people yet unborn will hail him as the founder of a mighty empire. Keep in mind this was 1770. For reference, he would have been 38, and in 1789 he became president of the United States when he was 57. To me, that seems like a prophecy come true because he said he will become chief of nations and a people yet unborn. He was first president of the United States of America at the age of 57, so that was just 19 years later. I think it's really interesting if you look back, the Indian Chief Red Hawk said, "The Great Spirit protects that man and guides his destinies." And then George Washington himself, in the letter to his brother, he said, "By the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I have been protected beyond all human probability or expectation." Both of these point to a divine intervention. The chief wasn't necessarily, it doesn't look like he's a Christian, but he knew that something spiritual was happening, supernatural was happening. And George Washington definitely realized that too because of the divine providence that he mentioned. I also wanted to point out that providence, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, means divine guidance or care. So he definitely gave credit to where credit was due. He knew he couldn't have done that himself. You don't dodge bullets like that. It doesn't work. Trust me. I can be a skeptic, but I've heard other stories that kind of correlate with that about men being saved from things that just doesn't work on a human level. Like, doesn't work naturally. It's definitely supernatural. Uh, like take Daniel in the Bible. Uh, thrown into a lion's den. Yippee. But he came out the next day, and he is put in charge of even more stuff than he was before. And so you see it's a reoccurring theme that happens throughout history. Um, and so it's fascinating to see and learn about these things. So anyway, that was all about our bulletproof president, George Washington. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to comment and tell me what you thought about it down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Bye.